Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, you made an extraordinarily interesting comeback, political comeback in Malaysia 4 months ago, and are now Prime Minister for the second time, having already served 22 years. You are now 93, I should add. Why did you believe you had to come back and lead your country once again?
Well, after I stepped down and two new prime ministers took office, a lot of people came to see me, asking me to do something because they felt that the country was not being run in the way that it should. Many of them, several delegations came to see me. I tried at first to advise, but they don't like to be advised. They don't listen to advice. So eventually I was forced to resign from my party and to set up an opposition party.
But what was the determining factor for you? What made you do it? You said you will only serve for 2 years. 2 years is not a long time, but in politics, it sometimes is. What do you hope to achieve in those 2 years? And is there any kind of scenario where you can foresee staying longer than the 2 years you've promised?
The previous Prime Minister created a lot of problems. In the first place, he borrowed far too much money, which will mean that the country will remain indebted for 40 or 50 years because of the amount he borrowed at very high interest rate. And then, of course, he subverted the administrative machinery, making the administrative machinery, the officers of the government, almost to be a member of their party. And they work for the party rather than for the government or for the people.
But can you do anything in those 2 years, or is there a scenario that might compel you to actually stay longer?
A lot of things can be done in 2 years. Certainly we can remove tainted officers from their positions. We can enact new laws. We can abrogate draconian laws. Many things can be done. At the same time, of course, we are already trying to reduce the amount of loans that we have. So the government would have to be a very lean government, which will be able to overcome many of the restrictions caused by lack of funds.
Does that mean, though, you do not expect to stay longer?
I don't expect to stay longer. In the past, when I was there as Prime Minister, I have been labeled a dictator. I have all kinds of bad labels against me, including having cronies. Those people who say that, they say that because somebody reported and the rest just followed without any investigation. Yeah. There was no cronyism. There was no dictatorship. When the time came for me to step down, I stepped down without anybody pushing me. No dictator has ever resigned.
Prime Minister, let me move on to your political comeback on the international stage. We are here in New York. You will be addressing the United Nations General Assembly. Times have changed, though, haven't they, since you were in office?
Yeah.
Over 15 years ago, you stepped down in 2003. The global multilateral system is being seriously challenged, as you were aware. Many people would say it's even being eroded by the United States. Just how concerned are you by Trump's rejection of globalism and all of the institutions that underpin the post-World War II order?
Well, a lot of things are happening. For example, 15 years ago, there was no war in the Middle East. 15 years ago, the world was relatively stable and peaceful. And there was no American president who performs just like Trump. They seem to be much more accommodating. So, but now we see a lot of changes. There is a war being fought in the Middle East, several wars in fact. A lot of people are suffering. We have this so-called globalization, free trade and all that, which has not been properly studied and implemented. And we have, of course, finally we have the President of the United States bringing about a policy that is not typical of the United States.
And what does it mean specifically for you, for countries in the Southeast Asian region? Trump has reportedly decided he will skip 2 important Asian summits coming up in November. He withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, soon after taking office. Now there are threats being made about withdrawing from the World Trade Organization. How dangerous is he from your perspective when it comes to trade relations, international relations between nations?
It creates a lot of uncertainties. We don't know what can be done, what cannot be done, what policies will be followed by the powerful countries. And this, of course, affects our position, our wealth, because Malaysia depends on trade for its wealth. We are big exporters, although the country is small, but we have a very big trade with the rest of the world.
And you also have very good trade relations with Iran. And I mention Iran because what is alarming to a growing number of people here at the United Nations and around the world is the fact that the US sanctions that Trump is threatening and is actually imposing on countries, these sanctions today have an extraterritorial reach. Trump has threatened members of the Security Council and anyone else who does business and trades with Iran with severe consequences. These were his exact words. How does Malaysia respond to these threats?
We will, of course, suffer because our trade with Iran will be reduced, very much reduced. Even there could be no trade at all because of sanctions. But we trade with the rest of the world.
But on Iran, you have important, as you say, trade agreements, billions of dollars worth of trade agreements to develop Iran's offshore gas fields. You also are pursuing, I believe, a free trade agreement with the Iranians. Will these threats put a stop to this type of cooperation between you and the Iranians?
With Iran, yes, but we can cushion it with our other trading partners.
So you will cave into the pressures. You will have to stop your trade dealings with Iran?
Well, we have no choice. You know what the US is like. If you don't obey them, then they will take action on your banks, on the currency and things like that.
How much of all this has to do with the fact that the US is imposing its will because of the US dollar? Because much has changed in this world, but the US dollar is still the key in all of the ongoing trade. Is there perhaps some kind of international action that can be taken to find a parallel transactional system that would allow countries to trade without giving into these types of political pressures from Washington?
We once proposed that we should not use the US dollar. We have a system of trade that is almost like barter trade, where we only pay the difference in our trade. If we export more and import less, then of course the other country will have to pay to export more to us, and we settle the difference only.
But you did peg the Malaysian ringgit to the US dollar.
Well, that was
that
because the world still uses the US dollar. We have no choice. With most countries, trade must be conducted in US dollar. That was since Bretton Woods. So because of that, we find that there is this danger that against the US dollar, our currency may be deliberately devalued. So that was when we had to take certain measures to free ourselves from being dependent upon the US dollar.
But being dependent, does it mean that countries like Malaysia and others, and Malaysia is a quite influential country within Asia, does it mean that you have alternatives, that you can turn to other countries for partnerships, or that you just simply have to, again, give in to what many are calling bullying by the United States? The Iranian President Hassan Rouhani called President Trump a bully. I wonder, do you agree with him?
Well, when we talk about a different way of trading, not using the US dollar, the Secretary of State at that time, Mr. Baker, went to Japan and Korea and told them not to accept this proposal. So we couldn't do anything about that. But what we can do is we can gain control over our own currency. This we could do because we have very big savings. In Malaysia, savings is about 40% of GDP. And the savings is, some are in US dollar. So when we need US dollar, we can change for if people in Malaysia want to import in US dollar, we can provide them with US dollar.
Because you've also called for free but fair trade. And again, would you ever have fair trade if there's only one mega currency? Or should we, for example, look at oil, for example, being traded in other currencies than the dollar? Could that be an idea that could be implemented?
I think oil is mostly traded in US dollar. Any attempt to use other currencies will not find favor with the US.
What about your relationship, Prime Minister, with China? If I could turn to that for a moment. Beijing, many believe, is projecting power. Some might argue it's soft power, but many others would say it is actually hard power as well. It has made important efforts to develop a deep sea fleet. To what extent is Malaysia and other countries in the region worried about this newfound influence that's being projected by the Chinese?
We are worried over the change, and we will have to make adjustments. Malaysia has had relations with China for over 2,000 years, and somehow or other we managed to survive. They didn't conquer us. So at this moment, we have always been friendly with China. In fact, Malaysia is the biggest trading partner of China among the ASEAN countries.
But you have counselled some important investments, 40 billion at least, since you took office. If you called for them to be stopped, I wonder why. Is that a wise and sound policy for you? Are you able to turn away from China?
Every country has a right to look after its own interests. If certain actions are taken by foreign countries which are detrimental to the well-being of Malaysia, we have a right to take action. What we did is, of course, it is because the previous Prime Minister has done a lot of wrong things, and we have to change what he has done. And in the process, of course, it affects contracts by Chinese companies.
But beyond this, there seems to be a quite significant change of tone, because you were long known as a loyal friend to China, certainly in the 80s and 90s when you were in office. And now, just last month, when you were in Beijing, in front of your Chinese counterpart, you said, and I quote, "There's a new version of colonialism happening because poor countries are unable to compete with rich countries." Neo-colonialism, though, isn't new. I mean, what seems to be new is the emergence of China. Are you saying that China is a new imperialist power?
I'm not talking about China alone. There is a tendency among big powers to exert their authority over small countries. I mentioned at that time that it was President Sukarno who talked about new colonialism. And so I explained that there are other forms of colonialism other than occupying the country.
How much of a fine balance, though, is there for you? Because there is a significant Chinese community in Malaysia that I believe also holds important levers of the economy. How much of a fine balance is it for you to take on the Chinese?
They know that they are Malaysian. Although they may be of Chinese origin, they are Malaysians, and they think about the well-being of Malaysia.
What about quite a dormant conflict, it seems, that is sort of in the background that many people have forgotten, but where Malaysia and others are in some sort of a conflict with Beijing over the Spratly Islands, the archipelago. Is there a risk from your perspective of this ever sort of going back in the open and sort of leading to some kind of military confrontation, or are you comfortable with the status quo?
We are quite comfortable. Of course, China can claim that the South China Sea, because the word China is mentioned, that it belongs to China. But we have our islands there. We have even these flying fields there, and they have not disturbed us.
So you don't believe any major problems might erupt over these islands?
Not in the terms of conquest or fights or wars. That we don't think China is planning. What China wants to do is to keep the sea lanes open for trade, for themselves, and also for us.
And Prime Minister, speaking about the potential of conflict and the existing conflicts that are going on around the world, as Prime Minister, the first time around, you championed many Muslim causes around the world. Today you have a whole host of crises affecting Muslims: Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, not to mention, of course, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But I'd like to focus on the Rohingya crisis because it is closer to home. ASEAN seems to have turned the other way, perhaps under Chinese pressures not to be too vocal on this issue, even though many people have called the kind of violence that the Rohingya have been subjected to a clear case of genocide. Do you see it as a clear case of genocide, and are you willing to lend your voice to this issue and speak loudly within the ASEAN?
We have been vocal. We have taken action to the point that we can, but we condemn this action openly, and we condemn Myanmar for carrying out what appears to be genocide. So we have not minced words about this. Although our policy in ASEAN is the non-interference in the internal affairs of the countries, but because this is something happening to, although their own population, but it is grossly unjust, we have voiced our opinion.
Would you be willing to do more than voicing your opinion? Would you be willing to mediate? And again, your country, Malaysia, played an important role. Several years ago, I believe your ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Razali, played an important role in gaining the release of Aung San Suu Kyi. Have you been disappointed with her position, her denials of anything major going on?
I have myself written to her. She has not replied. I am very disappointed because during the time when she was detained, we had struggled and tried to get her released. Of course, eventually she was released. But over this issue, she seems to be a changed person. She did not want to say anything against the action taken by the military on these Rohingyas. So we make it quite clear that we don't really support her anymore.
You have lost all faith in her?
Yeah.
You do not support her anymore?
No.
Are you calling on other countries as well to perhaps do something about this?
We have complained about the treatment of the Rohingyas to the world. And in fact, we have ourselves received quite a lot of Rohingya people in our country.
Prime Minister, another tragedy, of course, is Yemen. I know you will be meeting with the UK Prime Minister Theresa May and many other world leaders here in New York and elsewhere. Will you be raising with Prime Minister May, for instance, the issue of her government lending its active support and supplying arms to the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen?
Well, I may or may not raise that issue, but for me, the problem in Yemen is because Muslims are not actually practicing Islam. They know that this is wrong in Islam, but apart from prayers and fasting and all that, the rest of the teachings of Islam are ignored by these people.
So what do you tell your counterparts? What do you tell Saudi leaders, UAE leaders and others who are engaging in airstrikes on a daily basis where a lot of civilians are being killed in this conflict? Do you tell them, do you see this conflict, this war as being illegal?
We have condemned the bombing and the attacks in Yemen, but we did not specifically take it up with the Saudis. At the moment, we are too preoccupied with the problems at home.
The problems at home, Prime Minister, and also let me just refer to problems that you have mentioned and talked about many years ago, which is countries having nuclear weapons.
Yeah, we still condemn that.
You say you condemn that now, but many years ago, in fact in 2006 I believe, you said all Muslim nations should have nuclear weapons as a deterrent, Iran included. Do you still hold this view, or have you changed this position?
That is because the nuclear powers have these weapons and are using it to threaten other people without actually employing it. But they want to remain the only powers to have nuclear weapons. So if nuclear weapons is to be held by any country, it should be everybody. Let the whole world have nuclear weapons.
But won't this make the world even more dangerous, calling for an arms race essentially?
But what is the alternative? Those people who have the nuclear weapons are the strong powers, and they are not going to listen to us.
But just to be clear, so are you saying that you still believe that Iran and other countries in the Middle East should in fact have nuclear weapons?
No, I think people should work towards having no nuclear weapons at all.
Including the big powers?
Including the big powers.
The United States and other members of the Security Council. Prime Minister, your final thoughts on what for you will be in the next 2 years your key foreign policy challenge and priority?
Our foreign policy is the same. We want to be friendly with all countries, irrespective of ideology or religion or whatever. But we also believe in helping other countries within our means, because we believe that helping others to become prosperous will prosper us.
And what will be the key alliances that will have to be formed if you are no longer looking so much east? You had a look east policy when back in the 80s and 90s you took on Western powers, you took on powerful institutions like the IMF, and now you're taking on, it seems, although slightly more gently in tone, China. Are you turning towards other alliances, Japan or any other country?
We are still looking east, and that includes China. There is much to be learned from China. A country that was very poor 30 years ago suddenly has become a world power and is among the richest country in the world. So there is something that they have done which has enabled them to achieve this turnaround. We need to learn from them. When looking east, it's not just about looking at Japan. We look at Korea, we look at Japan, we look at Hong Kong and Taiwan, and we also look at China.
You also look at China. How would you describe the relationship today, in your own words? How would you describe this relationship?
Well, apart from some problem about loans and all that, there is no problem with us as far as attitude is concerned. We believe China is going to be there, is going to be powerful, and we have to make adjustments for that.
And how many adjustments do you feel you will need to make to accommodate a new relationship with this US administration? How important is it for Malaysia to be dependent on the United States in any shape or form?
We are not dependent on the United States. We have never been. We have never asked for aid from the United States. We have always felt that as far as we can, we should not be dependent upon anybody.
But what kind of relationship would you like to see with this administration?
We want to be friends with everybody. That's all.
That's all. Just friendship and strategic interests.
Yes.
And are you hopeful that this is what will happen under President Trump? Will you be meeting him while here at the UN?
No.
You won't be meeting him?
I won't be meeting.
What is your message to him, if you have any?
Well, we would like to see the United States prosper, because a prosperous United States will be a good market for us. We export quite a lot to the United States.
And very finally, Prime Minister, your message to Malaysians and Asians watching you, and people in the Global South who've long looked at you as a champion of their causes.
Well, we achieved something that we did not believe we could achieve. We had a good election, and the ruling party accepts the result and gave way to us peacefully. No war, no killing, no violence. I think if it can be done in Malaysia, it can be done in many other countries. which at the moment are struggling to become democratic, but find a lot of difficulties in trying to do so.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
And best of luck. Thank you so much.